Welcome, everyone. My name is on Discord, Electric Rancid, or better known as Ryan. Uh, and I'd like to welcome Bitburg, also known as Dave, and from Just Crunch Games, and creators of games like Cthulhu Hack, the Dee Sanction, and previously Sanction, which is out currently. I'd like to welcome Paul. Welcome to the Illusion Horror and Con interview series, and we welcome you here.
Thanks for having me along. It's great to speak to anybody about this subject.
Yeah, that's absolutely no problem. And actually, I think it's great if we can just kind of start out and tell people who you are. What is Just Crunch Games, and you're in the current Kickstarter that we are here going to talk about today, the Dee Sanction, the Monrad edition.
Indeed. So, really, whistle stop tour. I've been gaming for 40 years. I have been writing as a freelance for 20 years.
Wow.
I have been publishing as an indie for almost 10 years. Um, I have always been a bit of a, shall we say, a random gamer. Never really, I've had a few campaigns in my time, but a lot of my gaming is one-offs, convention games, short-term games. I've played a lot of different games, many of which are strewn across about 10 bookshelves, most of them in this room. And so When I started freelance writing, I did so with Paranoia when it was relaunched in the noughties. And then after that, I've had various freelance jobs. But then come 2016, David Black published the Black Hack, made it available as the sort of framework, a mechanical framework for games. Within 3 months, I'd written, play tested, and published Cthulhu Hack.
Mhm.
Um, Oddly enough, Dee Sanction existed before this happened. So around about 2013, 2014, I had come up with the idea for the Dee Sanction. It was originally actually mostly a selection of cards which allowed you to randomly generate your character. So there are tables in the current book. Those were originally like playing cards, each of which represented your prior occupation, the group you got involved with that led you to being in trouble, and a magical artifact or book that you discovered. I ran a whole load of adventures for it at conventions, lots of playtesting, lots of running of adventures, which meant that I had several adventures in my sort of selection, and but I couldn't settle on mechanics for it, and it kind of faded into the background once Cthulhu Hack arose. I then spent a solid 24 months, I think, just writing constantly for Cthulhu Hack. Um, and then, so it wasn't until later that I kind of turned my attention back towards Dee Sanction, which I was still playtesting, but still hadn't settled on a rule system. And then I came up with an idea, which was effectively, so Cthulhu Hack runs on the basis that you have a dice for your resources, which represent your investigation skills and your sanity. And this is based on Black Hack's usage die, which was used for things like arrows and torches. So you, instead of tracking the number of torches you had, you would roll a die to see if you had run out or not. In Cthulhu Hack, you roll a die after you have completed a piece of investigation to see whether or not the thing that you have uncovered has caused a revelation which threatens your sanity. Um, and so that usage die found a new purpose, and in that I realized I could use it as a effectively a way of managing the basic abilities of a character. And part of that came down to my fascination with mechanics and a desire to basically instill down the business of a fairly competent person probably has a 50% chance or better of doing something, which is a one or two on a four-sided die.
Yeah.
So most characters in Dee Sanction start with a six-sided die, which means they are quite competent in doing most tasks. It's about 60, well, whatever, 66% chance of success. And I kind of like that as an idea. Um, that these were people who were fairly ordinary, but they were good at some things enough to be able to get by and sort of shine in the moments that presented themselves. And so suddenly I had a system. I called it the utility system initially because that's what it was. It was just a utility to me to bolt onto the Dee Sanction. And so come 2019, 2020, I started writing it, and that's when I did the Kickstarter. Um, and so, yeah, Dee Sanction, having been around for 7 years, suddenly had a system that seemed to work. And yeah, so I proceeded from there. And I've forgotten what the question was.
That's okay. I think you answered it all beautifully.
Good, good.
Yeah, for myself personally, I picked up the desanction probably about, I'd say 3, 4 years ago now. And going back to kind of what you said on, you haven't done too many campaigns. There's a lot of one shots that you seem to have done. That's kind of the same as myself, and I find it's one of the only systems that can that I love to pick up and bring to like conventions
Yeah,
and offer on various servers to run, because it's such a it's a very nice, I don't know if better way to say it, like it's a clean, nice system that you can just pick up, explain to someone in less than 10 minutes, and it works. Like it honestly just works, and it's a fun time. So that's one of the was that one of your kind is that one of your is that kind of how you like creating RPGs, like making something that you can just pick up that's not that complicated? Like, is that part of, like, I'm just curious, asking about your design processes where I'm trying to get to when you do this kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah. So I think um, I won't. Uh, I dislike the character generation process where it is overly long.
Yeah,
Um, I am not innately a improviser. Um, I think it's probably just the way things work inside my head. I can, and this is going to sound a little bit weird, I can improvise if you've given me enough time to prepare. I
makes
can't,
sense.
I can't improvise on the fly. So as a GM, I will improvise a session because I've prepared for it. I won't necessarily sit there and mechanically reel out encounters, but I will have spent time considering what might happen, as in the overarching plot and the characters that might be around, and I will take it from there. And in a way, this impacts my ability as a player to enjoy the process of character generation, in that I don't, generally speaking, unless I really sort of understand the game and what's going on. In fact, it impacts all my gaming. I don't like board games that are just thrust at me either. There's nothing I hate more than sitting there and having somebody explain a board game to me, because I won't get it. I won't understand it. And it. So part of that has fed into the desire to, first and foremost, know that there will be other people like that. I know there are. Some people enjoy character generation. Some people are happy to sit there for an entire session and, story tell their way through the formative years of a character. Um, but if you look back to a game like Traveller from the 70s, it was a bunch of rolls on tables, which ultimately gave you a whole load of skills, a character that had spent decades potentially developing a career, and you could start the game. And that's kind of the approach that I would prefer, like a loose framework of sort of seeds and hooks, which you can hang off a background as you get used to the game, but don't put you in a position where you need to formulate the character in depth beforehand. And I think it's possible to get a fairly sketchy skeleton of a character together, and even potentially have them connect into the group that are around you without having a great weight of lore that's generated by the end of the session. And the idea of spending an hour doing that again, I would enjoy it if I understood the game better and the background around it. But I want to be able to do something quicker, to sit down, create a character, understand the game, maybe 5, 10 minutes of effort, and be playing, and then create the characters as you go along, make it a genuinely collaborative, enjoyable experience of sitting, spending time with people, developing the character, revealing things, a little bit more like a TV series or something where you discover who the characters are over the course of time. Randomly the X-Files has come into my head. Mulder and Scully weren't the people who they were in season 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, because over time you began to understand who they were. You didn't know in episode 1. You just had, this skeptic scientist and somebody who's treated as a, a somebody who you almost couldn't trust with doing anything, who'd been dumped into the basement, whatever, because of what he believed in. And that developed over time. And by the end of that series, you still didn't necessarily know what the characters were about. And I think that's far more enjoyable. So
Mhm.
yeah, with Cthulhu Hack, with Sanction and Dee Sanction, the idea is you're creating a skeleton. You're creating little points upon which you can hang things. And it means at a con, as you said, actually, I pride myself in the ability to be able to sit down, briefly discuss what the game's about, explain the mechanic, and get character generation done in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Gen Con I was at in 2016 or 17, I ran 2-hour sessions of the Cthulhu Hack with character generation. Because it was, we get the character generation, the mechanical stuff out of the way in the first 5, 10 minutes, and we'd be in
Mhm.
playing a game, a scary game about Cthulhu stuff. And so that's what I do. And as a result, it does mean, generally speaking, it kind of then feeds out into the games that I write in general, that I accept that both players and GMs might be quite like the idea of having a framework that they can build on rather than be handed reams and reams of lore and endless chapters of information,
Mhm.
while absolutely understanding that is I might use the term even a something down to the way your mind works. Some people may appreciate 400, 500 pages of lore. Other people will prefer a pamphlet,
Mhm.
and I'm somewhere in between.
Yeah. No, that's great. And yeah, no, and I find that like from the first edition, what you kind of just described, just having points like this mechanic does this, or even described in the setting, this happened, and it's just nice short paragraphs. You can take that, you can prep something, and yeah, and just bring it to the table, and prepare and do things, but beforehand, as a GM, and there's just enough like there to, you know, give give you that inspiration. I find in Dee Sanction. Um, Mhm. so let's pivot and tangent back here. We've talked about mechanics and your kind of design philosophies. For people who don't know, what is the Dee Sanction setting wise? Like what period, or yeah, what period does it bring forth?
So broadly speaking, it happens in the second half of the 16th century. Um, Queen Elizabeth is on the throne. She has inherited the throne after her father passed it to her brother Edward, who then it was then passed to her sister Mary, and it's now come to her. And that the passage of rule has actually made is really complicated. There's all stuff to do with religion, swinging from Catholicism to Protestantism. Her father, in pursuit of divorce, effectively separated himself from the Pope and Rome, and it's a politically it's a really complicated situation. And the game takes place during that period of time, which is made more interesting because while I'm willing to be shot down by historians who actually know better, because I've only got a degree in history, and to be honest, that's shows for nothing, really. Um, this was also a time when magic and science were kind of still combined. We had moved from we were steadily moving from the period where everything could be explained by happenstance or the actions of some wizened crone up the road who has just, poisoned all the milk in your field of cows, to more of a scientific point of view about how things might happen. But it was still in the crossover point where it was all mixed together. So you could have somebody like John Dee. John Dee was both a scientist and a magician of sorts. He was into maths, he was into astrology, but he and astronomy, and as in astrology and astronomy, as in he was up for a star sign, but also used stars for navigation. He was that. That's probably actually a fine example of being on both sides. Uh, there to cast your horoscope and hand you his paradoxic compass, which was meant to be a way of navigating the oceans and finding your way to the lands beyond the sea, which promised gold and prosperity for the British Empire. And so, very complicated period. That's the backdrop to what happens. There is magic, and at this time, because of the situation that Elizabeth is in, she's also really strapped for cash. There are political enemies, there are wars raging. She needs funds. One thing she does is to make sure that nobody can take what she has away from her, and she passes an act of parliament against conjuration, enchantment, and witchcraft in 1563, which effectively says you cannot use magic, you should not use magic to harm others, to kill others, or to search for treasure. The last bit being really relevant to the fact she doesn't want people running off with stuff that belongs to the crown. But the notion that's actually everything I've just said up to now is actual history. The Dee Sanction adds that in 1564, after a year of petitioning by John Dee, the Queen is convinced that executing practitioners of magic because of what they've done is not the best use for those individuals. Dee convinces her that they could be used as a defense against the supernatural and the use of magic against her, if they could be forced to toe the line and effectively told if they work on behalf of the Queen, they can earn their pardon from what otherwise would have been their execution. So each player takes up a role as one of these individuals who has been basically led to their cells and threatened with the gallows, and is told, hey, you have another chance, you have an opportunity to prove yourself and show that you are better, and you are willing to support the Queen by doing this, working on her behalf. And so that's from 1564 onwards, the Dee Sanction, which is what this change in the law is called, exists. And the agents are part of it all the way through to the end of the century.
Mhm. One of
there you
the
go.
beautiful things, I think, choosing that time period is kind of what you mentioned, the balance between, well, on the one hand, we disallow or we don't want magic to be used, but on the other hand, well, we can only use magic ourselves to make sure that nobody else uses magic to figure out who the evil guys are. Um, I think besides, I mean, they're grand points, but what was the main kind of point that you maybe had initially that you positioned Dee Sanction as the Tudorian or Edwardian period that you wanted to have that game set in? Was it
Um,
specifically Dee or the balance of magic and occult, basically?
D was the hook that
Okay.
caught me.
Hmm.
And I have thought about this, having had discussions many, many times about what specifically grabbed me. Um, all I genuinely remember is that the name came to me,
Yeah, that
and it
something's
seemed
right.
there was something clever about it. It just seemed like an interesting thing, and I studied history in the university. One
Mhm.
thing I had done was really focused on history. I actually took a course on history and politics, and really didn't get on with the politics side because it was all recent and sort of as admirable and interesting as it might be to study the business of the last century. There was something more exciting to me about 500 years in the past, and it feels as you said and I've said, it's just a period of conflict and turmoil
Mhm.
on almost every level, politically, warfare wise, theologically, scientifically, magically, everything seems to be in flux.
Mhm.
And Dee is as I said, a representation almost of an individual who is spread across that entire spectrum. He is in the court of the Queen. He is an advisor to her. He is a confidant, and he cast the horoscope that determined when her coronation should be. He had potentially known her while she was still a princess, who was effectively imprisoned by her by Mary beforehand. He was involved with the politics of things. He was potentially involved, or at least aware of the spying activities that were going on. Maybe, and this is me now extrapolating, he went to Europe for almost 10 years. And going to Europe was something that you did when you were a spy as much as anything. Yes, there
Mhm.
were traders and so forth, but he wasn't a trader. His father had been a trader in cloth and so forth, but his pursuits had gone elsewhere. He was an alchemist. He, along with many people, claimed to be able to turn base metal into gold. He, like
Mhm.
everybody else, couldn't, but he was in it for the money. He was strapped for cash a lot. He was just a really interesting individual. And yeah, he just caught my attention, and everything seemed to swirl out from him as I was coming up
Mhm.
with, ideas about the background. And there, as I said, I then just came up with ideas for adventures around this premise.
Mhm.
And everything, it's one of those things where everything seemed to hang together. The idea that it is based in a lot of history means that if you're even vaguely aware of it, it kind of almost makes sense. I have had people
Mhm.
say, "So how much of this is true?" And I'll go, "Well, most of it." Um, and people who are not necessarily aware of Dee are certainly aware of, Queen Elizabeth, who, one of our most, significant monarchs, as, this woman who was, effectively so very significant and powerful and influential and a target of so much attention on so many levels. And she's just a fascinating monarch.
Mhm.
And then you just, as I said, have so many things happening around her. And so the game then adds the dimension of magic. It's not just about the conflict of politics and war. It's people trying to hex or whatever the Queen
Mhm.
Elizabeth, or setting demons or automatons powered by magic or whatever it might be. But it just became a fascinating experiment to sort of build on this and run adventures for it.
What I specifically like about this is also like this compared to Western, this folkloric aspect, the cunning folk that have their beliefs. I know they are example of Fey realm and the ideas of Fays, and which are also very strong and common practitioners folkloric aspects. And I think that's what brought me, or what I kind of found very interesting is one of the aspects that kind of leads back to the mechanics, which is your tradecraft mechanic, where you, as a collaborative group, kind of have to overcome the enemy. Can you a bit elaborate maybe on this rather unique, I find, aspect of this game setting, which is slightly different than others because it might prolong a single session with to many more sessions if you choose wrongly.
Yeah. So, first and foremost, I must admit, tradecraft is easily the most contentious part of the system in terms of people coming to me and saying, how does this work? I don't understand it at all. And I have to admit, it is an area which will definitely see more focus in the Monad edition. It's one which I've written articles about on the desanction.com blog. It is an area which I have looked to, not simplify, but intentionally make it as clear as possible, the idea behind it. And the notion was, there are in many games there is I feel a certain, maybe a weakness in the very powerful foes that at a basic level, when presented on the page, they are defeatable in potentially in a single session. Notionally, it might be possible to extend things, but I don't think any game that I am aware of, I'm not to say that there is no other game that does this sort of thing. There's nothing that actually has mechanically been put forward to almost create layers or hurdles. It's almost like locked doors surround the target that you're after. And until you found all the keys, you can't reach the bit that's in the middle. The idea is that a powerful enemy can only be overcome by revealing a number of key facts. Now, potentially there's maybe something almost board game-ish about that. You've got the right combination of cards, and the only way to do that is to go to certain places on the board. Maybe I have to, it felt like I wanted something mechanical rather than just narrative to say this enemy can't be beaten. That just,
unless,
but I could have said, if the enemy is marked, then you can't beat them. If it says you need to play more than one adventure. So in a way, tradecraft became the mechanical explanation and the way of keying an enemy, potentially with anything from 1 to, if you're really unlucky, 6. I don't think I've come up with an enemy that's got 6 tradecraft. But
well, the example is the elemental giant, right?
yeah, it's just so at a very simple level, there are some of the enemies, and I've got the rulebook in front of me. So if I can actually find the section, which obviously under pressure I won't be able to, the Smajvuk, okay, effectively a kind of shape-shifting vampire / wolf creature, has 3 tradecraft, and those tradecraft effectively represent the kit that is required to destroy it, which might be, for example, say a cold iron dagger. You might choose, for example, there is a conspiracy, so you might have to reveal the cult, which actually are the group of followers that surround this individual and prevent you from being able to destroy them. And there is vigilance, which means you need to have perhaps identified the place where they return to at the end of each month, for example, during the opposite of the lunar cycle, maybe when the moon is at its lowest ebb, they have to go somewhere. And those 3 things need to be uncovered before you can defeat it. But when you are sent on the mission, you don't even know that that's the creature you're going to be fighting. So the idea is at the start of the session, the GM, as effectively representing your sort of handler for the agents, explains what the mission is going to be about, and then you have to choose one of 6 tradecraft to do with equipment or magic or conspiracy or access or other things. And once you've chosen it, there is, as you mentioned, the possibility that it may not apply for this creature at all. So you've kind of missed the mark on that. But and it's literally called a mark when you actually use it for that purpose. What you can also do with it, though, is use the notion of what it represents as a kind of free-floating skill during the session. So maybe if you chose kit, it could mean that during the session, you kind of are more prepared than a group might otherwise be, because you've actually thought bringing extra equipment could be useful. So during the session, the GM is going to be kinder to you when you need equipment, because you've got kit as your tradecraft. At the end of the session, you find out that maybe you're up against another creature, not the one that you're after, and kit is irrelevant, so you can't actually use it to advance towards the defeat of that creature. But you know perhaps a little bit more about the creature and what you need to target next. So maybe you do find out that you need to be able to discover, about a certain magic, a certain cult or whatever. But the idea is that mechanically you can't defeat this 3 tradecraft creature in one session. It could take you as many as 4 sessions. And I also have it in my head that it's almost like a TV series, that has an arc plot. There's a villain behind it, and maybe that's an 8-episode series. So actually, only 4 of those episodes will deal with the bad guy. There'll be some bottle episodes as we go along, or there'll be some side quests, and it's just a mechanical way of almost giving the GM a framework for a sort of a short campaign.
Yeah, which is fantastic, and I think very unique, that aspect as well. Ryan, thank you.
Yeah, no, tradecraft is one of those things I haven't explored yet, but I like you said, as opposed as you're kind of related to a TV series or something, it's maybe you're there sitting watching the show. It's like maybe it'll happen this show, maybe we'll see what happens, but it's nice that it's nice to see that. It's nice to see an ability kind of like that. And one of my personal favorites in running the system has been and even seeing how different players employ it is the angelic favors.
Yes.
Yeah. Anytime I run it, people I tell, like, when I say it's a magical power, people are expecting this big thing that they can use to
fireball.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's actually really nice because people, when you get the description, no, it's just it's a small, minute thing, but people have used it in various ways to, like, bring joy to the table or change the tide of something happening in game. Love it.
Yeah.
So like with talking about tradecraft and angelic favors and things like that, what can people expect going from Dee Sanction first edition to the Dee Sanction monad in the new Kickstarter?
So I mean, essentially, and one thing that I've highlighted during the campaign so far is I want to reassure people that it's not a second edition. It is a refinement of the existing book. It will not overlap any of the books, except for the fact that it needs to include the rules. But notionally, I almost have the idea that after it's published, the GM can have the Monad edition, and the players can then have the soft cover as something to be passed around the table for if they need it during character generation, but they'll only need it for 5-10 minutes, so who knows. But the idea is there that it is a way to clarify and to build on the information that has come before. So a good example would be favors. Favors, as it stands now, are explained in maybe half a page of information in the book, and then there is a table which gives you the favors. And you're right, there's something incredibly entertaining about the way players can use something really simple. I mean, my favorite being, I think, an adventure which ended with the villain half defeated but effectively getting away, and somebody who had the favor of dirt, which has a favor it describes as a molehill, literally summoned a little pile of earth just in front of the person who was getting away, so that they fell over this molehill. And it was enough to actually stop the escape of the bad guy. It was very small, but that's the idea of it. It is the ability of people to come up with ideas and ways they can do it. But rather than just leave it at that, I just want to give, for example, with favors, a little more flesh, so that a bit more meat around what they are, what they represent. They key into the actual historical business of John Dee wanting to, he was seeking the universal language which he believed Adam and Eve had spoken the Garden of Eden, which was later termed as as Enochian, which is this kind of universal language which he believed that the angelic hosts communicated in. In the game, this investigation has led to him finding out certain things which allows him to almost gift agents with these very small abilities. It's also embedded in something they carry called the Black Amulet, which allows them, and I'll pardon myself to Star Trek, to effectively have universal translators, which mean that when you get into an adventure which involves a negotiation with a Polish diplomat or something, or wouldn't have been Polish at the time, so Bohemian or whatever, you don't need to know their language. You actually can speak and understand their language. You can't read it, you can't write it, but you can talk in it. So you suddenly get over the hurdle of nobody needs to choose a language as a skill. They could, because funnily enough, the amulet kind of creates a voice a little bit like a really poor electronic sort of simulation of a voice. It's kind of like emotionless and doesn't carry any sense of like lies or deceit or whatever about it, but it allows them to communicate. But anyway, back to the subject. The Monad edition is delving into the deeper side of things. So another good example would be there's lots of little bits during the existing rule book. There's like a tiny little timeline which only takes up half a page. There is a section on key enemies of the Queen, which takes up maybe 3 pages. There are little references to organizations like the School of Night, which literally gets a couple of sentences, I think. I want to expand on those. So in connection with almost the reference to kit and tradecraft, for example, there will be a section on the Office of Revels, for example. So when Dee was a university student, he put on a play, and during that play, he had to have somebody basically be flying during this theatrical production. So he used a device to do it, but he did it so well that many people in the audience genuinely thought he had used magic to do it. And it gave him a reputation, even as a student, that there was something unusual about this man. And so at the same time, the court effectively around the Queen and people before her always had entertainers. People would come and do music and plays and so forth. And it was the responsibility of a group of people that fell within the Office of Revels to actually organize these entertainments. So I wanted to connect those two things and add the extra special sauce of the Dee Sanction to it. And so you have the idea that Dee has bought his unusual grasp of mechanics and devices, embedded it in the Office of Revels, and the Office of Revels is a little bit like the Dee Sanction's Q division, who can now provide you with devices that allow the agents to do things and have little tools and extra things. I really wanted to develop that at some point into a supplement. It's now going to be something that's explained more within the core of the game. That's what I want to do. I want to build on it, and I don't want to turn this into a 500. It's not going to be a 500-page book. It's 180 pages, which for me is it's a big book. Yeah. But yeah, I want to have the opportunity to just breathe a little extra life into the features that are not purely historical, because what I have always said with this game is your best source for supplements and adventures is the library or the bookshop. Go there, find the section on the Elizabethan period, the Tudors, folklore, and read those books. And they are full of adventure ideas. And you don't have to. I mean, you can send me money. I'm happy for you to spend money on my stuff, but at the same time, you can go to a library and borrow books essentially for free, maybe, and come up with adventures of your own. And I like empowering people with that as a possibility, and I want to do that a little bit more with the Monad edition.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And
oh, okay. Oh, yeah. No, sorry. No. And Another thing about the Monan edition, the difference between the first and this revised release is, and one of my favorite things is, like you said, having the time to generate ideas. You've brought six different authors on to provide for GMs who don't have time some great scenarios and story ideas to this Kickstarter. Would you be able to tell us anything about these authors, or
Yeah,
just
no,
maybe?
absolutely. Yeah. So the original idea, I wanted to do this book at a certain size. 180 pages was what I'd calculated as what I'd need. Although there's always a bit of wiggle room, but that was the target. Because I knew I already had the rules, I knew what I wanted to develop, I knew I wanted to include a certain number of adventures, and I'd previously published the Dee Sanction adventures, and I knew the actual format I have for adventures is also quite short, punchy. It's like 8 pages of information at most normally with an adventure in it. And people were really, I had lots of really positive feedback about them. So it's like 3,000 words. They really are, they're quite short and to the point. And so the idea was for the Kickstarter, if I only achieve my goal, I would write it all. So the stretch goals are to take some of that responsibility from me and hand it to other people who have the opportunity then to add their own voice and their own, imagination and creativity to the fray. Now, in some cases, these are people I know also who have already shown a great deal of interest in Dee Sanction, and they've written their own material. So Dee Sanction exists in a kind of open sort of creative state where you can use the system and write your own adventures, providing that you make a reference to the Dee Sanction, and the fact that it's that I'm kind of in the background, so to speak. So the likes of Stephen Dosman, who was the first stretch goal, wrote The Witches of Wenlock Liberty, which is a chain of 3 adventures, which I really enjoyed reading. I ran at a convention. I actually ran these adventures probably unwisely because they could easily run for 15 to 20 hours. I somehow squeezed them down into 3.5 hour sessions. But I had a lot of fun doing it. So I was really keen to get him on and involved. Steve Dempsey has written for Pelgrane Press, most notably recently with Fearful Symmetries. He has a great deal of interest in John Dee and the business of the sort of his studies and so forth. I knew he was a fan, so I was absolutely up for inviting him as well. And Richard August has previously written for the game. He wrote The Harrowing of Harlow Hall for the original edition. He has gone on to become a professional writer in the meantime, writing for for Steamforged Games and others. And so I was also happy to invite his return. He is still part of my gaming group, so we are sort of constantly in touch. We both lived in Manchester for a time, and actually his adventure for the stretch goal is based in Manchester because Dee served as the warden of Manchester during the very late period of his time. Right now we are almost on the Steve Dempsey. We've funded Stephen Dosman and Richard August. Beyond, and I'm really excited for these two because they're sort of names that I think people would go, "What? You've got what?" Sort of like, so Jason Durrell, better known most recently for RuneQuest and the basic role-playing game from Chaosium. He has been a fan for the Dee Sanction for a while. We both go to the Kraken gaming convention in Germany, which is like a residential gaming convention. And he ran the adventure that I am going to hopefully, please, publish, Courting the Stone. He ran it, and I was really excited hearing the feedback from people who played in it because I very rarely play in my own games because I feel it's rather unfair on the GM. It almost feels like making them pass an exam or something. So that's the last thing that I want to do. But yeah, I'm really excited to get that published. And then the stretch goal after that is Shana Germain, best known for her Monty Cook games, various Monty Cook games publications, as well as an array of novels and short stories. I met Shana at Dragon Meet, which is almost a Christmas gaming convention in the UK. She was there on the Monty Cook game stand. She was actually kind of doing a grand tour of Europe at the time. She was going from country to country. And I met her there, and I was wearing a Dee Sanction t-shirt. And almost the first thing she said was how much she loved that t-shirt. And we then just got into a conversation about it. And what it was, and explaining a bit about it. And after the convention, I just thought, is this worth trying? So I sent her a message, and I said, look, I'm hoping to kickstart this game. I love the stuff she's written before, especially Old Gods of Appalachia, which was quite a recent book. And I said, just would you be interested in writing an adventure? And she just signed on and said, yes, absolutely. So there is maybe the potential for other writers as well. I've kind of got them in the wings just in case, but until we get towards that end, hopefully they shall remain secret. But yeah, it's lovely to have this potential to sort of hand off the responsibility for the adventures. I'll still be writing one in the main book, but yes, the rest will be written by these guest writers.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think with that, we come to an end for tonight. And thank you, Paul. Maybe in short, for anyone who just wants to convince others to kickstart as well and help stretch goal reach the stretch goals, what is a good reason to back the Dee Sanction Monad edition?
It's personally, for me as a creator and a designer, it is effectively by supporting me. You are sort of almost like the fuel to my engine in terms of producing more great games and material. Genuinely, that support. It's not just in this case, obviously I'm funding the printing of this book, but support in general is absolutely necessary for all creative endeavors, and knowing somebody's out there. So the Monad edition, I believe, will be a fantastic book. I was impressed by the support for the original edition, and I really hope that this is going to be something special. And I would love to have everyone on board and getting involved, because I love this game, and that's why I'm doing it. And I hope people will join me in those endeavors and help support Queen Elizabeth and ensure her continued reign.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And that's from us at the Illusion Horror and Con. And with us today was Paul, who talked about his latest Kickstarter, the Dee Sanction Monad Edition. It's still live for a good 2 weeks, so if you haven't done so, support this beautiful game. And yeah, I hope that is enough reason for joining into the Edwardian Tudorian era of the Dee Sanction. Thank you very much, Paul. And
thank you,
Ryan. Thank you all.
Thank you, Paul.